Hi everybody, how's everybody doing? You okay? We're having a fantastic time at Panathēnea. We love this conference. Are you going to come back, Duncan?
Definitely.
We're going to come back. We love it. It's such a good time of year for a tech conference, and Athens is so beautiful, and the people are beautiful as well. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mike Butcher. I am a journalist, an editor, and I like to party. And I have been at TechCrunch for 3,000 years, and now I'm doing Pathfounders, which is a new media company. So please go to pathfounders.com, like, subscribe, and share, and you'll get our journalism first if you do that. The rest of you, we don't care about you. Go and read TechCrunch, whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, Duncan Clark. Now, as our MC just said, Duncan is a former founder. So he's been through the wars, just like many of you. He is now Canva's head of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. But he started on my side of the fence, weirdly, in journalism, publishing. Then he moved very crucially, interestingly for this story, into data storytelling, particularly around the climate crisis at the Guardian newspaper in journalism. But unlike me, he became super intelligent and left journalism, unlike me. Unfortunately, I'm still there because I'm just not intelligent enough to do anything else. And he co-founded Flourish, which was a startup to help people tell better stories with data. First, it was an agency, and then it built a product. Like many agencies, actually, end up building a product to scratch their own itch. And that startup was then acquired in 2021 by Canva. So it's really been a very interesting journey. Duncan, when did you realize Flourish, your startup, wasn't just as kind of a side project, but it was going to be a product?
Well, I mean, it all came out of doing interactive journalism at The Guardian and doing kind of fancy graphics and maps and stuff, but they were all built bespoke. It was like a kind of cottage industry. And we spent several years, my co-founder and I, just making these bespoke graphics to order. And through that whole time, we were thinking, someone's got to build a product for this. And actually, the only reason we didn't do it earlier is because we assumed someone else would, which is a common sort of fallacy for founding things. Actually, a lot of things don't get built that should exist. And so in the end, we decided to do it ourselves. But when we did, that was a very deliberate decision. We did a fundraise. We flipped it properly into a product company, and we turned down all the other work.
And it worked. Well, it certainly worked. It's such an interesting idea. I often see people who build inside agencies, build products, and they go like, wait, it's a startup. It's so interesting, isn't it? So with that background in data journalism and with Flourish, did it shape your view around product and storytelling in a different way than when you were a journalist?
Yeah, definitely. It's a completely different way of thinking because you're providing the infrastructure for other people to make things rather than making things yourself. But I think what we found, I think this is a sort of general lesson for founding companies here, is that if you've done something yourself enough times, you start to see the patterns in it, you understand the kind of underlying paradigms, and it's actually often in that deep sort of sense of domain knowledge that comes an interesting startup idea, rather than just plucking something out of thin air.
And I know that actually that product that you built is inside Canva, so it's quite interesting that you're seeing the journey continue. But as head of Europe, Middle East, and Africa for Canva, what do you think is distinctive about scaling Canva in this area compared to, say, the US, for instance?
I mean, the obvious difference is localization. And so, when people think of how you localize a product for a market, and of course, Canva, for anyone who doesn't know, we've got 265 million active users every month, and it's a design platform designed to be easy enough for anyone to use. And so for us, we've always had this very global scale. But to make that work, you need to be really localized. You need the product to feel local to each market. And that sounds easy. It sounds like you just translate the text. But actually, if you think of something like Canva, it's actually a platform. It has one of the largest ever libraries of stock photos. So if you search for breakfast in the UK or France or Greece, like, what do you get back? So it has a search engine localization need, all the templates need to be localized, but it's not even just translation. It's like, what are the local festivals that people might want to find templates to use? So the main challenge in EMEA is just that it's very, very heterogeneous. It's 90 countries, and so there's a huge amount of localization to do.
But there's also very rich design culture and design heritage from Europe, as you know. So, is there a little bit of a tension between something that you're doing, aimed at individuals or small companies, and maybe sort of the enterprise approach as well?
Well, maybe to a degree, but we generally find that what enterprises want is to be working in their own visual language. So a big part of what Canva does is lets companies set up their own branding so that everything is kind of automatically kind of on the right style and in the right tone of voice, which extends not just to templates, but that extends through things like tone of voice for AI. So if you auto-generate a presentation, does the language feel authentically yours? And so that's like one way of doing it. And then the smaller companies generally are a little bit less driven by their own branding and more just quickly getting something out to market.
But speaking about that sort of internal language you mentioned, I noticed I watched an interview that you did online, and you said that everyone has become a publisher. So internal comms, onboarding, HR, marketing, sales. Is that a kind of quite a difficult thing to do culturally inside companies?
Well, I think it's a mega trend, just to give the context there. So our kind of view at Canva of the world is that we are increasingly living in what we would call a visual economy. And you can see that in the rise of social media. You can see it in the way that young people interact with images rather than text often. And I think what's really happening is that the technology is catching up with the way our brains work. We're hardwired to be visual creatures. We track movement. We have a much better visual memory than we do a memory for facts and text. And so we've always been visual. The technology has held us back. But with the rise of democratized design tools like Canva, with the rise of social media, it's becoming more and more a visual world. And everyone's expected to communicate visually if they're to cut through the noise. And so I think that's the mega trend. And so what we're seeing at Canva is that that's playing out in businesses. So it used to be that the marketing teams were the ones who were doing all the content. They would be the designers. That's where the kind of content creation would live. And of course, marketers still produce a lot of content. But increasingly, it's the legal team actually need to get their stuff right. I mean, internal comms is classic. You might have a company of 10,000 people, and you've got someone in HR who's trying to talk to them all. And of course, generally, if they just send a plain text email, no one's even going to scan it.
No.
And so the question is, how do they command the attention? It's a kind of, in a way, it's an attention competition because of the amount of content in the world. And so doing things visually is an essential part of being noticed.
I noticed that the Pope recently issued a huge the first ever encyclical from the Pope, and it was something like 40,000 words, all about artificial intelligence. And they also used an infographic to illustrate what they were actually trying to say. Do you know if they used Canva or not?
Well, I don't know. It actually reminds me of when we first looked at our Google Analytics for Flourish, and we were going through all the countries and looking at the ones we didn't recognize. We had some readers in Antarctica and some in the Vatican City. So, yeah, maybe it's the same crew.
You got readers in Vatican City. I think they maybe used Canva.
Yeah.
I think they probably did. That would be very interesting. A lot of people are worried about AI, and the AI models being used to, generate. I mean, I can type in a prompt now and just say, give me an infographic to illustrate an article that I've written or something like that, and it'll do it. So to what extent are you concerned by that? I know that obviously you have some levels of AI built into your product. For these people, this audience, what would you say to them about the tension between using a tool like Canva or just, using a model, an AI model?
So we've kind of very wholeheartedly embraced AI. And in fact, AI has been part of the Canva product since before it was a thing. So stuff like removing the background from an image, that we've actually owned the best background removal model, which is all homemade for the last 6-7 years. And what we've done recently, we launched our whole new AI suite a couple of months ago. And the way that works is that it generates a composite design made of elements. And if you think of how design generally works inside an LLM, it's about generating an image. And the problem with generating an image is it's incredibly hard to edit. It's incredibly clunky to try and do that conversationally. Like to write in text, move that title over a bit to the left, please don't change anything else, and the type looks a bit different. It just doesn't really work. It's expensive, it's slow, and you're regenerating the whole thing. And
And it
so,
regenerates it with the things in the wrong place or whatever.
Exactly. It's amazingly hard to actually control. And so our whole approach, and this is in core Canva, it's also in our professional suite of tools like Flourish and like Affinity. Our whole approach is that AI should be generating something of the form that you would make yourself. And then that's naturally putting you in a place where you're empowered as a human to edit it, to control it, to collaborate with the AI rather than just have the AI do the work for you. And so that's what we've been doing, investing in really, really heavily. And we're obviously in an incredibly good place to do it because we have millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people designing. So we know about how design works. And that includes having a paid community of template creators all over the world who can opt in to have their templates used to train our models about how design works. So that's really, really puts us in a place where we can do this collaboratively, but also with a set of data that other companies don't have. And that really sets up a much more healthy relationship between the human creator and the AI assistant.
I noticed that you also now let users pull live data from tools like Google Analytics into HubSpot. What are the kind of implications of that?
Well, the implications of that, it's really just about, I mean, what Canva's always been about is just making things easy. And one of our kind of product values is make complex things simple. And so if you think of how it would have once worked, even like a year ago without data connectors, you would have had to say, oh, there's that brief that I just was sent in my email. I need to go and literally copy and paste it, maybe save it into a doc, and then upload it to the prompt when I try and generate the presentation. And obviously, that's just a high friction way of getting that data into that system. So the data connectors just let you tie everything together so that you can get to your end result faster, which, our view is that creates more time for you actually to focus on the fine-tuning, the authorship, the taste, the creative elements. So it's about getting rid of the drudge work so that you can focus on the interesting stuff.
Sometimes I get a feeling that when you get a very sophisticated product like Canva, actually it starts to kind of resemble Microsoft Word, and there's lots of features, and it becomes kind of actually slightly less simple than it was to begin with. What do you feel about, how do you communicate to people about what mistakes in particular that they might make that might be just obvious instead of, or leaning into kind of the power of the product?
Well, yeah, I think all products have to sort of walk this line between ease of use and accessibility versus power, and also, do you help the user proactively or reactively? And I guess your reference to Microsoft Word, everyone has the nightmare memory of Clippy jumping up and saying, hey, why don't you let me edit this text for you? And the way we've done it at Canva is that we just have a really, really strong belief that the product should be easy enough for everyone to use, and that's kind of sacrosanct. And so when we review a design for a feature, we're always thinking, would a school child be able to use this? And if the answer is yes, then that not only means that everyone else can use it, it also means that the 100 million school children who use Canva every month are actually going to be able to be successful with it too. So obviously, there's a huge amount beyond that around how you do progressive revealing of more features, whether you let users sort of opt in to have design off-brand issues flagged and those kind of things. But our general view is you need to keep the product experience clean. You need to not sort of jump in the way of the user. You need to avoid lots of pop-ups, whether it's in onboarding or promotions. And you need to be kind of transparent with what the system's doing for you.
I know this is incredibly ancient history, but Evan Williams, who was one of the co-founders of Twitter, and then obviously became X, he originally founded Blogspot, which then was acquired by Google, and Blogspot gradually became feature creep, like Microsoft Word, and then it was acquired by Google. And then when they did Twitter, they were like, let's just remove all the features, and let's have a box, type in some words, send, that's it. And it's an interesting lesson to learn, especially for startups, especially on like user interface in UI, UX, is to kind of just make it simple,
Totally. There's simplicity and there's also consistency, because the other thing that's really unusual about Canva, I think probably unique actually, is that the same underlying document format can accommodate everything from a presentation or a document to a spreadsheet or to whatever else you might want to make, a social post. You can even mix and match different file formats in the same kind of what you'd normally call a document or what we call a design. And the reason that's important from the UI perspective is that if you know how to use one of those features, you know how to use the rest. So I was very closely involved in building Canva sheets, and a lot of the UI questions just answer themselves because there's already a standard pattern in Canva for everything to do with text editing, colors, styling, borders. So it just naturally moves across. And there are two major benefits to that. One is it's just easier to navigate the product. If you know one bit, you know all of it. And the second bit is when you introduce AI can operate across all of those different surfaces in a really consistent, integrated way.
I'm going to take you back to your founder journey again now. And, when your own startup was acquired, I mean, how do you feel like, how can a startup that gets acquired sort of retain the DNA of the product? I mean, sometimes you can fight it, sometimes it doesn't happen. I mean, how important do you think, especially as a founder, the many founders in the room, what's it like for you? What was your feeling in terms of the product being integrated and taking the DNA of your startup inside an acquirer?
So, I mean, my particular experience has been incredibly positive. And in fact, we were in the very lucky position of having had quite a lot of acquisition interest before that we turned down. And the reason we turned it down is we just didn't have an instinctive sense that these were our people, and or that the journey would be more exciting. Our kind of bar was, will this acquisition make life more exciting or less exciting? And where it came in less, we basically walked away. And it was only when we spoke to Canva that we found ourselves feeling, this feels very culturally and instinctively aligned. It was very, very quick, the way we did the acquisition process. And that reflected the fact that there was a high level of instinctive trust between us and the Canva founders. And so I would say my advice for all companies considering acquisition would be, do you think that this is going to be, is this just instinctively, is this going to make your life better? Because if you're not going to have fun after the deal, then it's going to ultimately be life-sapping.
I see. So now, let's see. You were acquired in 2021. It's now 2026. You obviously didn't. You obviously could have done your earn-out and popped off somewhere else. What made you stay?
So a couple of things made me stay. I think if you'd asked me at the time, would I still be around now, I would have said probably not, even though I always loved Canva as a company. But a few things made me stay. One is that Canva is probably unique in the world in combining its speed. Like, as a profitable company growing this fast is probably unique. But secondly, there are other things about it. It's still very much like a startup. It's still got a very high level of delegated trust to acquired founders. And importantly, it's very significantly charity controlled. Not a lot of people realize this, even big Canva fans, but actually more than 30% of the equity in Canva has been pledged to good causes. So to a very significant extent, it's, for me, a bit of a sweet spot combination of being at a very exciting company while actually trying to do something useful and good for the world. And
I guess maybe you can sleep well at night, unlike some founders who've joined some evil empire, the Death Star. God knows who the Death Star is these days. Well, it's very interesting to speak to a former journalist who's been a founder, exited, now inside a very large tech company. One day when I grow up, perhaps I will aspire to such a journey. I'm not sure. Unfortunately, like I said, I'm just not intelligent enough. But it's been fascinating to talk to you, Duncan. Ladies and gentlemen, Duncan Clark from Canva. And from me, Mike Butcher. We'll see you later. And we'll see you next year.